attention to work for more than a few minutes at a time? Well, it's not your fault. Our brains are constantly superstimulated. Everything is designed to be too delicious, too engaging, and too shocking to look away. If you think you have it bad, spouses, jobs, and homes have been lost due to World of Warcraft. At least 3 people have died of dehydration while playing computer games. Other non-fatal side effects of the modern world include an IQ drop of 10 points just for having notifications on, and also severe attentional deficits when spending only over 20 minutes a day on your phone. I don't have all the answers, but I do struggle with focusing on what I need to. So instead of downloading and reinstalling Instagram every few days, I've been trying to figure out exactly what happens in our brains when we reach out for these distractions, and therefore how to avoid them. How can I be more peaceful, energetic, and willing to work? If any of these 3 steps sound familiar, we have some necessary unpleasant work to do. This leads to a drop in our motivation or willpower, and that leads to procrastination. I'll explain what I've discovered happens in our brains during each of these steps, and therefore how to change it to have sustained willpower and do more pleasant feeling work. Let's get straight into it. Let's first talk about our drops in motivation. When we leave a task and switch onto something else, we think our attention has switched from this task, and also our motivation for this work has dropped. If our attention was on this task, or if we simply had more willpower to do it, we would surely be able to stay working. This is not true. There is a lot to suggest that our willpower is a lot less depletable than we previously thought. It does not run out very fast. Even when we think we are out of it, we actually have a lot more. It's just hidden. See, both our willpower and working memory or attention are both strongly mediated by the same part of our brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. What this theory suggests is if our attention shifts onto something else, it will therefore bring our motivation along with it, being perceived by us as a motivation drop for the task that we were previously doing. So it's not just that we are distracted, but our motivation is distracted too, so we can't work. In order to do a task, we need to be able to focus on it so we can sustain our motivation for that task. So we need to clear out our brain from distractions. This means if an intrusive thought or desire comes our way and takes up space in our working memory, we need to write it down immediately and plan to do it later, or even promise to ourselves that, you know what, I'm going to think about how horrible of a person I am today at 4 p.m. because I don't have time to do that right now. This can help free up working memory space and keep our attention, focus, and motivation on the task at hand. Now, I hope I haven't lost you, because I'm also quite cautious of this theory based on anatomy alone, but very interestingly, there are lots of important studies that show that even thinking that we have endless motivation or more motivation than we previously thought can help us perform better at tasks, make less mistakes, and even somehow increase our IQ by up to 15 points. The optimism of thinking that we have more motivation or that difficult tasks make us more motivated helps us perform better in general. This is very important if, like me, you used to subscribe very strongly to the ego depletion theory, which I'll link somewhere else. And at the very least, planning to procrastinate later is very important because it makes your phone less accessible to you to reach out whenever you want to. And getting used to removing this option for yourself has huge benefits in the long term. A study found that keeping notifications on while we work, even if we are told explicitly not to look at them, think about them, or check them, lowers our performance in these tasks drastically. The average IQ of the people in the study dropped by 10 points when keeping notifications on, and this is double the drop seen in studies of cannabis users. Another study of 7,102 adolescents found that even spending 20 minutes a day on their phone led to severe attentional impairment. Some interesting things in the study also found that the more likely you are to have your phone by you while you sleep or while it's charging also showed some intentional impairment, probably because of the patterns of behavior of people like me who are very likely to do this. So in general, it seems the best thing that we can do for our willpower, motivation, and focus when it comes to electronic devices is keeping them as far from us as possible, keeping notifications off as long as possible, also spending as little time as we can, and not reaching for it again and again throughout our day. Being aware that we control our attention controls our motivation, so we'll be motivated for what we focus on. I'm now going to move on to exploring and potentially changing the way that we think about doing unpleasant but necessary work. Now, if you feel very, very guilty for potentially procrastinating or not wanting to do your studies or your essays or your work, This can get a lot worse, and it's super common. A very peculiar and extreme case of procrastination happens with patients with chronic disease. An observed effect of some patients with a deadly disease who have a very important medication, which is potentially life-saving, that they need to take every single day, is that they will sometimes just stop taking it. And the potential reasoning explained for this is that for these patients, even thinking of the medication has such a negative feeling because, of course, it must feel dreadful to be reminded every day of the physical condition that they are in. If they take 2 of the medication accidentally, then maybe they need to go to hospital. Maybe they have a fear of needles. There's so many negative associations around it that eventually a lot of these patients actually stop taking the medication altogether, even though they know it is necessary for their survival. The process of even thinking of doing the task becomes so unpleasant that they stop doing it even though they really know that they should, and they really want to. The theory that I'm referring to here is that of the field, which describes this subconscious flinch that we get at even thinking of doing a very essential but unpleasant task. The way that this phenomenon is described is that in the beginning, there's no flinch and no fear or no procrastination. There's only very real negative consequences for an event. For example, if you don't do good work, you're going to get fired. If you don't study well, you're going to fail your course. You're going to be embarrassed. If you don't pay a very expensive rent, you're going to be kicked out of your house, etc., etc. People will start to feel this negative emotional stress when they are starting to plan or doing events in this direction. And eventually, they might even get to the point where even before planning, just thinking of anything associated with this important task or problem means that they have this huge negative emotion and they want to avoid it immediately. This is what's potentially happening with the patients. Usually associated with this mess is a displacement activity, something that seems to be comforting or numbing that we do instead of doing the task that we're supposed to be doing. So for example, having a very important exam, and instead of revising and studying even the week before, binge watching a TV show to numb yourself out and avoid that huge negative feeling. Now, there's a solution to this, and 80% of it is already done by listening to what I just said, because understanding this process means that we will realize that this field, or this negative, strong feeling that requires a displacement activity, will happen essentially before we have started planning for a task. So the solutions for it are: 1, when we are given a task or give ourselves a task, and before we even go down the cycle of making it terrible for ourselves and having this flinch, realizing that this is going to be really bad, I'm probably going to develop an field around this. So I need to be cautious every time I start to think about it. I need to immediately force myself to make a plan, because once I make a plan, these cringe or flinch will go away and I'll be able to complete the task. Also realizing what sort of things are we more insecure in. Because the bigger the negativity or the negative consequences, think about the patients for whom risk is actually death. The bigger the negative consequences, the bigger, the quicker, and the stronger this field will be developed, and the more we'll want to procrastinate for the task. So realizing where am I more insecure and more likely to feel that I have negative consequences is going to be much more helpful for us to be able to jump into that planning immediately. In this way, we quiet our lizard emotional brain, bring things back into our prefrontal cortex so we can plan, organize, and structure. And we've also addressed how to approach necessary but unpleasant tasks, which leads us with our very last point. The last barrier in our brain's focus on work are the displacement activities, the mind-numbing, addictive, interesting, anxiety-quietening things that we tend to procrastinate on when we should be focusing on work. Things that we do when we simply can't focus. So what I'm going to use here are the 2 ways that our brain can make decisions. One is a bottoms-up decision-making, one is a top-down decision-making. Now, procrastination, I think, almost all the time is a top-down decision-making activity, which basically means it's an automatic rule that we always do. Top-down decision-making means something is encoded. It's automatic. We have a rule for it, so we just implement it. It comes top-down like an order. When I'm bored, when I'm distracted, when this is no longer interesting, when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I can't understand what I'm doing, when I'm scared of the consequences of my studying, I'll just go to Instagram and scroll the reels. So this is a top-down decision. When we procrastinate, we're just going for the default. I'm bored, let me grab something. I wake up in the morning, go to my phone. I finish my work at night, get into bed, I have my 2 hours of scrolling and doing whatever I want. These are the rules that we're just implementing. What I'm suggesting is that when the opportunity arises for us to switch a task, or when we feel bored or unfocused, we don't use this top-down processing, but we instead use bottom-up processing. Now, the difference between bottom-up processing is that it's a case-by-case basis. It uses no rules, but from the bottom, it collects everything from our surroundings, moment and environment. How do I feel? What am I thinking? What do I need? And from that, it comes up with a single solution for that case. So let's say that I'm unable to focus on my work. And a top-down processing would be, let me just grab my phone, procrastinate on my reels for a few hours, feel too bad. And then it's, oh my God, it's too late for me. I'll just have to go to bed now at 10. I'm just going to sleep early so I can wake up tomorrow and do my work. And then I end up procrastinating until 2 a.m. Terrible. So a bottom-up processing in this case would be, I'm feeling thirsty, or I'm feeling distracted, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling tired, or I'm uncomfortable in my chair, or I've just been looking at the screen for too much. I need a break. And then realizing what's the actual thing that I need in that moment and doing that instead and making it energizing. I mentioned in my last video, which I'll link somewhere below, that I use these dice, that I use dice like this, which have kind of a word etched on each corner, and I will roll the dice, and it has complementary activity to things like stretching and music and working and calling a friend. So high energy things with hopefully lots of sounds to oppose my quiet, deadening work, which often does become boring and I don't want to focus on it anymore. So I complement with those instead of reaching for my phone and just procrastinating on things that I wouldn't want to do. Gathering information from our head and body to make the right decision at the moment is an amazing way to change previous patterns of behavior that we want to get rid of. So if you made it so far, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Thanks. Bye.